meeting. I'm sure if we have any apologies or absences, anybody have any apologies or absences?
We've had one apology from Richard Brown.
Okay, thank you. Okay, moving on. Standards Committee membership for the 2019-20 municipal year. That's included in the report. So please, will all members have a look at that. And particular welcome to all the new members to the committee. So warm welcome to you all. I hope you find this this meeting of interest, and you are able to contribute a lot to the discussions we have. It might be useful, just as we've got a lot of new members, for just to say who we are. So as we go around, just for so we all know who we are. I'm Kevin Proctor, the chair of this committee.
Good evening. I'm Jane Lefebvre. I'm corporate director for governance and community strategy, and I am the council's monitoring officer.
Good evening. I'm Tony Rudden from Partington Parish Council.
Good evening. My name is Lawrence Walsh. I'm a councillor from Gorse Hill Ward.
My name is Ben Hartley. I'm a councillor for Ashton Mersey Ward.
I'm Mina Minis. I'm councillor for Timpley Ward.
I'm Dr. Serena Carr. I'm the councillor for Broadheath Ward.
Good evening. I'm Councillor Denise Weston, and I'm a councillor also for Broadheath Ward.
Hello, my name's Patrick Myers. I'm a councillor for Hale Barnes and deputy leader of the Conservative group.
I'm Councillor Linda Blackburn, a councillor in Davyhulme East Ward.
Good evening. I'm Michael Whiting. I'm one of your independent persons.
Alex Murray, governance officer.
I'm Geraldine Coggins. I'm councillor for Altrincham and leader of the Green Group.
Clive Griffiths, independent co-opted member.
David Goodman, independent co-opted member.
I'm David Jarman. I'm councillor for Longford Ward.
Good evening. I'm Claire Churchill, and I'm councillor for Bowden Ward and also the vice chair of this committee.
Moving on to item 3 in the agenda, that's the standard committee terms of reference for the current year. That's just to be noted. So particularly useful to the new members to refer to that as what we're trying to achieve through this committee. So please have a look at that. Item 4 is minutes of the previous meeting on the 6th of March. I know we've a lot of the actual members here tonight weren't actually on that meeting, but those present are happy to agree that was a true record. Right?
Sorry.
Right, we'll make sure that's recorded. Thank you for that. Item 5 is declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest that members would like to give? Just to point out, item 7, all councillors will have a particular interest in that item, but that won't preclude them from speaking at the meeting at all. So please just raise any questions or points that you'd like to do through that, and don't be affected by item 7 on that. Okay, moving on to item number 6. That's a report on constitutional review of recruitment and employment procedures. This is a report or a review that has been undertaken in respect of HR procedures by external solicitors Itcham Sutherland, and it looks at their findings. And I'm going to ask Jane Lefebvre, the Corporate Director for Governance and Community Strategy, to present this item. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this is, I think the circumstances and the background to this are quite clear from the report. It arose out of various issues that had arisen matter was raised, in fact, in council last year around the process for the appointment of senior officers. And as a result of that, it was felt that it would be appropriate to conduct a review which partly sort of picked up on some points that had been referred to by the external auditors who'd looked at the constitutional arrangements and the processes that had been undertaken at the time when those officers were appointed. And whilst it was felt that there was no glaring issues with the constitution, it was felt that it would benefit from some general tidying up and some clarification. And therefore, this report sets out the changes that are proposed. It has already been to the Employment Committee. It is coming to the Standards Committee as it is part and parcel of the process around constitutional changes, which are more than just minor, which require it to come to Standards Committee. It's also been to the Executive and will ultimately go to Council for approval if it's so recommended. So I think the report is fairly clear in terms of both the circumstances that led to the review and the items that are considered appropriate for review. The changes are set out in detail, so you've got track changes version, so you'll be able to see what is proposed, and happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Thank you, Jane. Any questions at all? Councillor.
Excuse me, Chairman. I'm having great difficulty hearing what's being said. I don't know if you're...
Apologies for that. 3.13 in the Officer Employment Procedure Rules, it is proposed that the role of the leader is removed in making decisions about whether matters of concern should be investigated. My take on that is I'm not proposing that it's still up to the leader of the council decide whether decisions should be taken, but it seems a bit strange that he's not in that process.
So the changes in that respect are to ensure that it actually more accurately it reflects what the JNC conditions of service require, and also the provisions that essentially HR matters should be an executive function rather than have any political element at that stage. I think the views of the position of the leader is not excluded entirely, in that the views of the leader are a relevant consideration as part and parcel of the investigation. But it means that that the role in actually having a decision-making role is removed, and that is to make it more consistent with what the JNC conditions of service, which are nationally negotiated, require.
Thanks, Jay. Just so that I understand it. So what we're saying is the leader couldn't propose that an investigation should take place or a decision could be made on his own. I'm not proposing that, but we're saying that he would be consulted.
Yes, he would be consulted, but he wouldn't be part of the committee that actually investigates and determines matters. His or her views would be taken into account, but would not be part of the investigating committee.
So that I'm 110% clear. So it's set in stone that we would consult the leader.
Yes, I think it would be. It would be the views of the leader. It says there, views of the leader would be one of the factors to be considered by the investigatory committee in reaching a decision.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
Yes,
Can I just ask about the schedule, the track changes? Presumably they're going to be looked at again, are they? Because I did a fairly cursory read, and there's a lot of inconsistencies. I mean, well, you've got the corporate director of people, HR, in one place, but then the HR seems to be knocked out in others, and he became the corporate director of place in another.
Right. Well, thank you for pointing that out. I think there's been reference to some typos as well. So what we'll do is we will check that through to ensure that there aren't any inconsistencies in terms of that, because that was the main reason we were doing this, was to try and take out some inconsistencies that existed previously in terms of what things were called and the way they were referenced. So we will make sure that that's done. So it would mean that any approval that is made here today would be subject then to some sort of minor amendments, which are simply to allow for typos and those types of inconsistency, if you're happy with that.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? No? Oh, well, the report is for noting, so we're happy to note that report with obviously those caveats that have been mentioned previously. So it's recommended that the Standing Committee notes the Employment Committee's approval of constitutional amendments are set out in the report, and the proposal constitutional amendments are set out in the report, and notes referral to Council for approval and adoption. Okay. Moving on to item 7 on the agenda. This is an item on members' allowances.
I'd like to raise a point of order, if I may. So this refers to Section 8 of the Council Procedure Rules and relates to the background papers. In Section 8.1, the procedure rules state that the report given to a committee should disclose any facts or matters on which the report or an important part of the report are based. So given that in section 2.7 of the report, it states that the leader of the Conservative group, who was Councillor Sean Anstey prior to the May elections, was asked whether the reduction was maintained, and the report affirms this to be the case. This was not the case, and there's no recollection of the question being asked. And upon receipt of correspondence obtained under Freedom of Information rules, the Council has not been able to produce any evidence that this question was raised. The Council has also not released or made available any information that suggests the question was asked to the other political groups. So given that the report asserts, and it is disputed, that questions were asked of each group leader, but that there isn't a requirement to publish any documentation, there are concerns about how the committee can have confidence in the accuracy of these reports to take a judgment. The only documentation released has been the Labour group request. Even if that were the case, why were all group leaders not asked the question at the same time again in August 2018? And why did they not have to follow the same procedure? Given that the report states in paragraph 2.5, and I quote, however, given that there was absolute solidarity between the groups on the application of the reduction after the first year, the renunciation of the benefit was accepted as a group rather than an individual member decision. The question follows then why the question was not asked by officers to the new Conservative group leader to reaffirm the alleged position and the breaking of the solidarity between the political groups that caused a discrepancy. This should have been brought to the attention of all political group leaders at the time to ensure the absolute solidarity was maintained. So the question is, why was this not the case, and why hasn't it been addressed in the report? So the contention is therefore that the report is insufficient in detail in relation to Section 8 of the Council Procedure Rules, and the investigation needs to be reinstated and be a wide-ranging and independent one.
Can you answer that, Jenny?
I think in terms, dealing firstly with the point around independence, I think this is a report where, although the referral came through council from a motion without notice, is not, it's just been referred to the committee, it was felt that in order to ensure that there was independence around the investigation, that it would be appropriate to involve the independent, one of the independent persons. So we contact them, and in this instance, it was Nicola Jackson, who is the other independent person who was involved in the investigation in this matter. She unfortunately is not able to be here tonight because she sits as a part-time judge and was sitting, I believe, in Doncaster earlier today. So she was not able to be here. So I think in terms of the independence of the investigation, I think that is that aspect of it has been satisfied. In terms of the comment, I mean, the concern is around if I can understand exactly what your point of order is, because it was a very long and rambling argument in some points. What was the actual point of order that you're raising?
So that under Section 8.1 of the rules, the committee should disclose any facts or matters on which the report or important part of the report are based. We're suggesting that there's inaccuracies in the report because assertions were made without foundation, and there are discrepancies between the different groups on how the matters progress.
So is the point specifically in relation to 2.7, because it refers to the fact that there'd been that the position was raised with the leader of the 3 different groups in 2018. Is that the point?
Yes, that's the point.
Sorry, could I just get clarification on what rule is being cited? I thought you said the rules of procedure, which are part 4 of the Constitution, but there isn't any 8.1, and Rule 8 there is about quorum. I was just wondering if we could get clarification of exactly which bit is the Constitution. Thank you.
If it helps, Chairman. Sorry, I'm losing my voice, so you have to bear with me. But the 8.1 refers to the background papers rather than the quorum.
Just bear with me, Chairman, because I just need
Yes, sure, yeah. While we're waiting for that, if anyone has any other comments they'd like to make in the interim period?
If I can add, Councillor Proctor, specifically with regard to, was the leader of the Conservative group, did he have the matter discussed with him? I've got no knowledge of that at all, and I was the deputy leader at the time, and I have no knowledge, and it's the sort of thing that if either of us had been approached, we would have discussed it with each other before approaching the group. So there's no evidence produced in the report tonight that actual discussion took place.
So, Chairman, the position is that 8.1 does refer to background papers. It says that the appropriate corporate director or director will set out in every report a list of those documents called background papers relating to the subject matter of the report, which in his / her opinion disclose any facts or matters on which the report or an important part of the report is based, and which have been relied on to a material extent in preparing the report, but does not include published works etc. So it's to do with background documents. I think the point here is quite simple, that there were no background documents relating to this particular point. The only background documents which exist are those which have been disclosed. The information around the fact that the position had been discussed with the leaders of the groups comes from, I think there were some emails where there was a reference to the matter that it should be disclosed, if I remember rightly. I haven't got the review documents. Have we got the background documents handy? The review documents, Alex?
Yes, I've got all the emails available here.
So, and I think the other thing is that this is something that had been discussed. So I spoke to officers who had been present at a meeting, who, I think there's an email in the email chain from, there's an exchange between Diane Geary and Peter Forrester, if I remember rightly.
Sorry, I know Jane has found that. I still don't know what is 8.1 in. Is it part of the Constitution we're referring to? It's not the Rules of Procedure, which is what was said. I would like to read it. Thanks.
It is part 4 of the Constitution. Thank you. And it is to do with access to information. Thank you.
Okay, yeah.
Thanks. Can I just clarify that as far as I can see from the motion about the investigation, and I just want to be clear on this, what the committee was asked to look at was whether or not the Labour group and the Liberal Democrat group had behaved, their behaviour was found to be, whether there was any impropriety in their behaviour. Now, that was what this was asked to look at. And as far as I can see, this point of order is not a material point that relates to that question that was put before the committee. As far as I understand, what has been put before the committee. That's what we're trying to answer here, as far as I understand.
Yeah, that's quite correct. I mean, we've not actually got to that point yet. We've kind of got a bit bogged down by this point of order, but we will move on to that shortly to analyse that issue.
I think it is a pertinent point that the point of order doesn't necessarily go to what the committee was actually asked to do at this stage. I think the question as to whether or not all background documents have been disclosed, the documents such as exist are there. The fact that they may not necessarily record everything that's happened, it may well be that they weren't recorded in papers. So all the papers that were relevant and available to be considered as part of the investigation are available as in the review documents. But I think that the point that you make is well made, in that it doesn't go to the root of what the committee is being asked to consider on this occasion.
I just heard what the borough solicitor said, and I must disagree, I'm afraid. The key point is the report itself asserts that the Conservative leader at the time specifically was given information about this item, and that is not the case. And you can't There's no evidence that you've managed to show us to say that that is not the case. So there's big chunks of the report that hang its hat heavily on the fact that that Sean Anstey, the Conservative leader, was asked and consulted at the time. And that, you know, he would assert, and I would assert, that's not the case.
All right. I think we've sort of answered that question. To be honest, you know, it's not a material factor in what the final decision is. But
as I say, I think the point was covered by implication in the email exchange between Diane Geary and Peter Forrester, which took place in August of 2018, where Diane said that the Conservatives said no and letters were prepared for Labour and Liberal Democrats. I will follow up now. That was specifically with relation to the rescission of the 1.9% cut. And those emails are in part of the background papers that you have. As part of this, I spoke to Diane Geary to find out what was the basis for that comment, and she indicated that she had been present at a meeting between the then chief executive and the then leader of the council when the matter was discussed before the election in 2018.
Yep.
I'd just like to thank Jane Lefebvre for clarifying that. But as far as I understand it, I'd just like to be absolutely clear on this point. What the committee has been asked to look at is the behaviour of the Labour group and the Liberal Democrat group. And this is not material to that, to what the committee has been asked to examine. And I think I've understood that correctly. What the committee has been asked to examine is whether the Labour group and the Liberal Democrat group acted with impropriety. That's what we are here to examine. That is not material to this.
No, sorry. So I would agree with you absolutely on that. And I think that the thing is that it is recognised that the way in which matters were handled was not necessarily the best way at the time, which is why there were then other recommendations in this report in terms of how we deal with the process going forward to ensure that all groups are spoken to at the same time, that the process is much more transparent, and also to ensure that when members' allowances are ultimately reported in the council's accounts, that it's made clear where members have accepted or have wished to renounce some or all of their allowances. So I think that there may well, I accept that there is no direct evidence in terms of what may or may not have been discussed at that time. It's not relevant to the issue of whether or not the Labour group acted improperly, but it is pertinent to perhaps having a more transparent way of dealing with things more generally in the future. And I think that's the way that I would suggest it to you.
Thank you, and I'm agreed. Now, I was quite shocked by this, being a new councillor, to having only just started, be accused of impropriety. And I welcome the report and the note that it has been also undertaken by an independent person. And I just want to clarify that point 4 recommends that the committee notes that there was nothing improper in the actions of the Labour and Liberal Democrat groups in indicating that a voluntary reduction should be reversed by their members. And just to clarify again, the accusation was that the Labour group and the Liberal Democrat group had taken a pay rise. This was the reversal of a voluntary reduction in allowances. And also, I'm very relieved to find that the committee the report put before the committee has found that there was no impropriety. And also, I'm shocked, really, that this appears to be political game playing.
Councillor Blackburn.
Thank you, Chairman. The original reduction was discussed at council, at full council, and this change about seems to be like a dirty little secret. Why was it not brought up at council? Why was it not announced that the reduction had been, been changed? This seems to be something that's been kept secret.
And I don't think that is the case. I mean, it went to council, and there was a council decision to refer it to standards committee. So I don't really understand.
No, I'm talking. Sorry, Chairman. I'm talking about the actual decision to change the decision. It wasn't announced. It was kept secret, as though it was something that wasn't going to be announced, and it had to be just something that we had to look into it, and we found out this difference. And I find it, as a female councillor, that a male councillor has a different basic allowance than I have. I find this quite disturbing.
Well, I mean, I don't think that's the case. The allowance was an individual matter, but I'll bring in some other people to discuss this.
Well, I mean, just taking that last point, Councillor Blackburn is offended by the fact that her allowance is lower than other members. It's a matter of individual choice, and she's free to reverse that direction and receive the full allowance. I'm offended by the motion, and also by the comments this evening that it was some sort of dirty little secret here, and the motion refers to that as well. Talks about a revelation submitted secretly with no public accountability. I mean, the report's quite clear. The reason we got the report was to look at the facts, and the report was prepared by the monitoring officer and by an independent person. And it's quite clear at 3.5 of the report, it says there was no requirement for any formal decision making around the decision on whether to continue the reduction. Any member could have called to reverse its application at any time. So it was clearly a matter of individual choice. So I think the suggestion that was made in the motion, and that's been made tonight as well, is that this was somehow done in secret is a disgrace, frankly, and it really shows scant regard for the facts that are set out in the report, and it casts aspersions, as Councillor Dr. Carr said, casts aspersions on the integrity of Labour members, which is simply unfounded and a bit rich, given the conclusions of the Supreme Court yesterday about the Prime Minister. But be that as it may, the report is quite clear. This was a matter of individual choice. The point of order, I think, is without merit, as we've covered, because whether or not the leader of the Conservative group was consulted at the time is nothing to the point that we're considering here in the report. So, I resent and reject the sort of accusation that there's been some dirty little trick going on here, and the report's quite clear in that regard. And I, for one, would be willing to commend the report and accept it, and I understand it will go back to the council to then debate as well. So,
Councillor Millis, you indicated first.
As far as I can see, this is mine. I mean, I wasn't here last year, so I don't know what did and didn't happen last year. As far as I can see, it's a voluntary reduction, and any member could decide that actually they could no longer continue with the voluntary reduction, and it could be reversed by any member and whether it's done, I don't know whether it was done an individual member or whether it has to be done as a group. I don't know. I don't understand. I don't know exactly the exact ins and outs of that part. What seems strange is when we have this, it's apparently it was a revelation, and we found how it was found out. If it was some sort of something done under a radar, how did it then come to surface? Seems a little bit strange that it then comes to surface. It turns up at the first council meeting. I was also shocked, like Serena here, that it's my first council meeting, and apparently there's accusations going around. I would like to know how the revelations, as it were, came to be, and there obviously is an email. Jane, you've shown there's an email that says that the group leaders at the time were consulted. So unless we're going to say that meeting somehow didn't take place and somebody must be saying something that's not entirely true, then what is what's the accusation here exactly?
Councillor Cowart?
I think I'd just like to point out that the members' allowances are a public document. They are available publicly. There is no dirty little secret in in allowances that are made available to the public. That is frankly ridiculous. How can it be a dirty little secret when we publish them publicly? It will be available. It is available every year. All of the members' allowances are available to the public. I think we need to condemn that phrase with, absolutely, because it is just untrue in something that is available to the public.
Councillor Blackburn?
Thank you, Chairman. We're here at the Standards Committee and we're talking about standards, we're talking about equality. This sounds like Animal Farm.
Councillor Myers?
Thank you, Chairman. One of the shocking things to us was when it was revealed 12 months after the increase had taken place. If we go back 2 years, it was the whole council that agreed to this because we wanted to show solidarity with the workers. And I think that was the right thing to do at the time. Maybe 2 years on, it was right to change that. But we were never consulted. We never knew anything about it and discovered it after a further 12 months. So that's why we were perhaps shocked and surprised, because we knew nothing about it until it came to light.
Councillor Walsh?
Thank you, Chair. I didn't want to speak to this item. I'm actually the Deputy Mayor of Trafford Council, and it's been intimated to me that the Mayor of the Council should stay quite independent and not political. And I take that role very seriously, even in my role as a Deputy Mayor. But I have to say, the Conservative members on this Standards Committee are questioning the integrity of our officers in the council. If the officers said discussions took place, then those discussions took place. And I have every confidence in the officers of these council. And I'm very concerned that the Conservative members seem to have had a freedom of information request to try and deal with this issue. And that disappoints me, that councillors are sending freedom of information requests into their own council. The recommendation is clear. There was no impropriety on the part of the Liberal and Labour group. It's quite clear that we can't undo that. It doesn't mean whatever. I'm genuinely getting confused about some of the things that the Conservative members are saying this evening. But whatever they say, the recommendation is quite clear, and that is how it stands. And I'll point you to point 6. If the Conservative group are so concerned about members' allowances, and in the fashion discussed this evening, it says, approves the proposal to add an explanatory sentence on the annual publication of members' allowances and to identify those members who were renounced part of their allowance on the same document. So then everybody will be able to see, the members of the public will be able to go onto the internet and read that item, and they will know exactly who has renounced part of their allowance and who hasn't. And I hope that will satisfy, I genuinely hope that will satisfy the Conservative group. But I really do think, Chair, we need to move on for this item, and there are other issues to discuss this evening. So I would happy to move the report, Chair, and that we accept it. Thank you.
I'll take just a couple more comments and I think we will move on then. Councillor Churchill.
Yes, I'd just like to make the point that we're not impugning the reputation of any of the officers. We're simply stating that there are inaccuracies in the report based on the recollection of the group leader, the Conservative group leader at the time, and that there's no evidence to support the contrary or the assertions that are in the report about that.
Thank you. It seems to me that there's more than one item being discussed. There's the proposition being put and the question, if I may put it this way, of the level playing field at the time the decision was taken. And I suppose I have partly a question, and that is the reduction in members' allowances was a solidarity motion, as it were, to on the mandatory freezing of staff pay, which ceased with effect from April 18. Was it generally known, or this is where I just have no idea how the council sort of promulgates these things. How widely known was it that the reduction that had been applied to staff salaries had actually ceased? In other words, that this was now a live issue.
So the reduction that applied to the staff. Sorry. It would have been. It was reversed as part of the budget proposals, and I think it had actually happened the year before. So there was a lack of synchronicity between what had happened, and it was something that was picked up at that point.
And that leads me on to what was my substantive point, and that is, from what I've heard, and I say it now because I don't think I can vote on any of this, but the issue, the disagreement is more about recommendation 2 than it is about any of the, what I call the more substantive items, isn't it? That the recommendation 2 is that that each of the political groups was asked to confirm whether they wished. And I think that seems to be the bit that is actually where the difference lies. Now, how you deal with that, I've no idea, but it seems to be what I've heard is that the conflict here is all around that particular recommendation than it is about any of the other.
I think we've discussed this in great depth, really. I think it probably is time to move on now. Obviously, the recommendations are for noting. There's one approval aspect of it, which is to notice on the annual publication of members' allowances and to identify those members who have announced part of the allowance in the same document. So, we only have to note those and put the other ones in approval. So we're happy to do that. Agree that approval? Yeah. Right. Thank you. So, apologies for that. If Jane wants to say a few words about
No, I don't think I've got anything further to add. The report is sort of clear. It just sets out the fact that this was reviewed by the working group, to bring it up to date. There are a number of changes that are proposed. Again, I think that we'll need to do a review of it for some typing mistakes. I think possibly it went out last week when I was on leave, so we'll check them through. But basically, the changes recommended, I think, are quite clear. The only comment I'd make at this stage is that it has only been reviewed by members. The intention is that it would go to council and it would effectively form part of the protocol in the way in which members and officers rate. So it sort of is effectively part of the codes and protocols in the Constitution. I think that it would probably be useful just to ensure that there would be no comments of any significant nature from the corporate leadership team, because it hasn't been considered further by officers, it's been considered by members. So I would just ask that you approve it subject to there being no significant issues proposed. I don't think that there will be. There's been some discussion informally, but I think just to give a formal sign off on that would probably be quite useful.
Thank you for that, Jenny. Can I invite any comments or questions on this item? Councillor Blackburn.
Can I just say it was a very useful sort of working group session that we had with Dominique, and it was we were able to sort of put forward a few ideas, and it was very useful. Thank you.
Yeah, I think during that review, I think one thing we did pick up was the GDPR need for that to be included in it, because obviously, it's a dated document, so it needed updating in terms of IT and GDPR and other issues like that. So I think it was a useful session to have, and it's added to that document. Councillor Hartley.
Thank you, Chair. I think it is a useful document. There are some. There's some references to cabinet, I think, rather than executive, and there's still some references to chairman and vice chairman, I think, which probably should have been amended. I had two queries that are of more substance, really. One was perhaps show my ignorance as a new councillor or newish councillor, but there's references in the document to the senior officers range, and I didn't know what that meant. It's not defined anywhere, I don't think. And I know we've looked at proposed amendments to the Constitution that talks about proper officers and corporate directors and directors, etc. So I wasn't sure what the senior officers range meant, and I think it'd be useful if it could be clear on that. The other comment was on page 45 of the document pack. So this is proposed amendment to the provision, so it's sort of halfway down the page. The existing provision is that officers should respond to inquiries and complaints in accordance with the council standards, and the amendment is that should start within a reasonable period of time. So I suppose my query was whether that change was necessary and why. Because do the council's standards and procedures not set any expectation about what a reasonable amount of time is? So, is there something set out in the council standards and procedures for officers which would say a reasonable amount of time to respond to a query from a member is 7 days, 14 days, whatever? In which case, I suppose my sort of reservation about that was that there might be a bit of a contradiction there if there is something set out and then we're saying, but it's got to be a reasonable period of time. I hope that makes sense.
No, there's nothing else which sets out reasonable period of time. In terms of senior officers' range, can you tell me where that reference to that sits? I might be able to help you with that.
There is. There's one at 7.3, but that's going to be deleted, isn't it? I think. But there's another reference. On page 10, page 48 of the document pack, about halfway down, proposed amendment there. It has, page 48 in the document pack. 8.3, yeah, 8.3A, and then 1. It says should not invite officers outside of the senior officers range to attend, and that's events. I think it's talking about there. So I think there are 1 or 2 references to the senior officers range.
That is really just means outside senior officers. So it doesn't mean it is only saying that it should only apply to senior officers. So it sort of, I suppose it's to me it seems quite clear. If you think it needs some further clarification, so. Because the appropriate point there is that you consider the seniority of officers attending, and that it should only be the senior officers that attend those meetings. Because if you are going below that, it can put undue pressure on more junior officers. And I think sort of senior officers is generally understood as sort of heads of service, directors and corporate directors. Now we can be more specific on that if it would help. I think the other reference you made was to proper officers, and proper officers are defined. They are the statutory officers of the council. So.
Councillor Blackburn.
I think the word range was, I think we referred at the time to like level of responsibility, and it was sort of that level, so that as you mentioned, those officers who were sort of lower down the scales didn't have sort of felt any pressure upon them to make statements or answer questions. But so range was that sort of level of responsibility. Just to clarify.
Yeah, that's good. Any further comments, questions? Yeah.
You could just say other than senior officers, which is the simplest formulation, I think. I did raise one somewhere, I think it's when officers in meetings, where it says there should not overtly or covertly be drawn into political discussions. I didn't quite understand what covertly meant.
Well, I think it can take many forms, particularly now we have mobile phones and such like. So I think, it is overtly is quite clear, but I think there are things. So it's difficult. Sometimes in meetings you'll have members that will want to speak or pass notes to. So it is about making sure that we're transparent in our dealings and relationships with members.
Could I just suggest improperly then? But it's up to you.
Chair.
Okay, yeah.
Just a minor issue. Sure, Chair. Page 11 of that report, item C, proposed amendment to provision written in red. And there's 2 paragraphs after that are just exactly the same. I don't. Which one is that? So that's 8.3 on page 11 of the council pack of that report.
Page 51.
Page 49 of the document.
Oh.
Yeah. It just repeats itself.
So no, is it 8.3C?
Yes.
Existing provision similarly where officers provide information and advice for a political group. Right, if that is a straight duplication, we'll delete it. Right, okay.
Okay, thank you for bringing that to our attention.
Yes.
Is there a proposed amendment that should be there? Yes, I suppose that was. Yeah.
We'll have to look at that outside the meeting.
Right,
we'll have a look at that.
Yeah. We'll make sure there's been nothing omitted, and that it is just a straight. That's fine. Okay.
Okay. No more comments? We're seeking approval for the amendments as set out in the report and the referral to council for approval and adoption. Are we happy with that? Yeah, thank you. Moving on to item number 9, we have a verbal report from the monitoring officer. Again, Jim Nufford.
Right, so really just to say that as I tend to sort of say, most meetings we have not had many referrals or complaints. I think we've had one complaint that was received, but was immediately viewed as not actually constituting a breach of the or raising issues with the code. That was referred back to the complainant on that basis. But it did raise some issues from my perspective in terms of concern around safety for members. And I think this is sort of an ongoing issue in some areas. I think it's difficult because I think members, particularly with the rise of the use of social media and the like, are much more prone to being attacked or held up for in the public eye in a way which should not previously have happened. So it is something that we're looking at as a result of this, to look at whether or not we can bring some further advice to members around how they can deal with and interact with members of the public in a way which will help to ensure and maintain safety at all times. So we discussed it with the member development group, which met at the end of August to look at what sort of appropriate training would be available. So we're looking to see whether we can find some suitable training in that regard. We did also recommend there's some really good resources on the Local Government Association website in that respect, and we've recommended this to members in the past. But I think it's something that that this committee needs to be aware of, because to the extent that I think it leaves members much more open to potential criticism because of the way in which social media can be used. And therefore, I think that this committee has a role in looking at ways in which we can help to educate and protect members to ensure that they keep themselves safe from such allegations, and indeed safe generally. So I just thought it would be useful if we have a review of what might be available, and that we bring it back to committee so that you can see whether you feel that this would be something that you think you would want to endorse. And I think training generally is an issue for me, because I think it's important now. Members have a very difficult job and it's quite technical at times. And I think that it's incumbent on members, I think, to avail themselves of training opportunities that are available. And again, I'd sort of like to look at the extent to which we can help to ensure that members take up the opportunities for training fully where appropriate. So I'd sort of bring a sort of more general report on training back in that respect. We've had one other complaint was received literally the day I went on leave, so it's been acknowledged at this stage. It's not one that discloses sort of, again, it's sort of an ongoing issue linked to noise complaint and the way in which some members dealt with that. So we're looking at that at the moment in early stages to see whether, again, it constitutes a breach of the or raises issues of standards. But we suspect that it may well not do. In other matters, I've been doing the review that I normally do of attending committees to ensure that the way in which they are proceeding is lawful, that the reports are acceptable, and that the minutes and things are accurate. And so from a governance perspective, I have a programme to ensure that I visit all committees, so I'll bring a report on that further through the year when I've been to a few more of them. But in that regard as well, we've had the annual governance statement has gone through the various stages being adopted by a council. And again, it sort of sets a very high level of assurance generally for the council's procedures. So I don't know if there's anything that anybody has a specific question about at this stage. I think that's it.
Yep. Thank you, Chairman. I'm not surprised that you've had a few complaints, just a few, because if you compare standards in Trafford with many of our other councils around us, they're clearly much higher here than they are in other areas. When it comes to safety of members and social media, could you extend your review of the situation to physical threats or intimidation? Because I myself, when I've been asking the most innocent questions on the doorstep just recently, and I know that Hale Barnes is a rough area, but I have been threatened with dogs and chased down garden paths, on more than one occasion. And I think if you could come up with some way of protecting members, that would be very helpful.
I'm not sure I can protect you on the doorstep. That becomes a bit more difficult. But yes, the actual general safety of members is an issue of concern. And I've been in discussion with the Superintendent of Police here about these issues recently. And we are looking, as I say, to draw up some kind of protocol or guidance for members around how they can try to ensure that they have safe contact with members of the public. I mean, it's a very sad indictment of the way things are that we need to do that, but I think it's entirely proper and reasonable that we do so.
Oh, thank you for that, Jane. Any other sort of comments or questions? So,
So no, it hasn't been done yet, because what is happening is they're looking at a wider communications protocol, and it will form part of that. That's been. It includes communications and consultation. I think it's been through some of its stages towards approval. When it'll come forward as a package, we felt it was more. It would be more relevant, meaningful, and if it was put within the context of the whole thing.
Okay, no other questions? Okay, moving on. Item number 10 is urgent business. We don't have any urgent business. So that's the end of the meeting, and thank you for your attendance and all your contributions. Thank you.